I came across a report in the Daily Telegraph which is very topical to a lot of the things I've been discussing of late. I'm going to read out the whole report and I'll put a link to it because I think the detail does matter. So the report's by Camilla Turner, posted on MSN but via the Daily Telegraph. And the title is "Police Called In as Hong Kong and China Tensions Spread to UK Universities." This is a day ago. Police have been called following a series of clashes between Hong Kong and Chinese students as universities are accused of failing to protect them. Students across the UK have told the Sunday Telegraph how they have been threatened, intimidated, harassed and in some cases physically assaulted by their Chinese peers while staging pro-democracy protests. It comes amid warnings that Chinese students from the mainland are being directed by the state to defend Communist China. In one instance, a student from Hong Kong said that while she was printing out flyers for a rally, she was attacked by a group of 6 Chinese students who pinned her up against the wall. Hong Kong students at Sheffield and Liverpool universities said they are now too scared to go to lectures where there are a lot of Chinese students following heated showdowns. In Sheffield city centre, violent clashes last week saw a Hong Kong student being hit by a bottle and a 19-year-old arrested by police under suspicion of committing a public order offence. Doesn't say which side the 19-year-old was on. He was given a caution while a 25-year-old student is being investigated by the university. There was a Chinese student who even threatened that he would kill us if we openly criticised China, said a second-year software engineering student at Sheffield. I never thought he would actually throw glass bottles at us. It reminded me of being on the train in Hong Kong when pro-China triads assaulted me. I thought Sheffield was a safe city. Why should I suffer the same similar situation as I did in Hong Kong when I am now in the UK? Vincent Mack, president of Sheffield's Hong Kong Society, said that students feel the lack of support they have received from the university has been shocking. There is a very serious sense of hyped up nationalism among Chinese students, he said. I don't think the university understands the severity of the damage that we face as Hong Kong students. We don't trust the university can help us anymore. We don't feel safe in Sheffield. We don't feel welcome here. There are more Chinese students who bring more profit to the university. As a stakeholder, we don't have much more to say. The number of Chinese students applying to British universities increased by 30% since last year, from 15,240 to 19,760. There is huge demand among the growing Chinese middle class for their children to have the English education, while British institutions are rushing to cash in on the higher international student tuition fees they bring in. Nick Hillman, director of the Higher Education Policy Institute, said that universities have become over-reliant on student numbers from China in recent years. As the Indian numbers have tailed off, we are now left with disproportionate numbers of Chinese students, and that leaves universities very conscious about the relationship with China, he said. They need to be very careful not to come down on one side or another and ensure the safety of all students. MPs were warned last month that the sheer number of Chinese students in the UK means that their influence should be considered, as they can change the nature of an institution. Dr. Christopher Hughes, a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Sciences, told the Foreign Affairs Select Committee that some Chinese students at British universities are being manipulated and used by the embassy and their agents in an organised fashion. Liverpool University students have told how a pro-democracy rally on campus they were surrounded by Chinese students. They were singing their national anthem in a provocative manner, said Sam Lai, a first-year Liverpool student. Some of them approached us and threatened us, saying they will find us and beat us up. Some of them attempted to assault us, but the police stepped in. Meanwhile, an Aston University student described the harassment she faced while taking part in a Hong Kong event in Birmingham city centre. It varies from taking close-up pictures and videos for identification purposes, shouting abuse and even physically following us after our event, she said. I feel threatened by this behaviour, and although the student union was supportive, I was told not to wear a face mask on campus when distributing flyers, which could have personal safety implications. We have decided to hold our events in the city where police protection made us feel more at ease in exercising our rights of demonstration. So she's saying it's safer in Birmingham city centre than it is on the university campus. A member of Exeter University's Hong Kong Society said that during their pro-democracy rally in the city centre earlier this month, they were stalked and followed by Chinese counter-protesters. The student also feared their identities being revealed, adding, "We do believe they are circulating the photos through social media and we are all possible targets to them." Sheffield, Aston, Exeter and Liverpool universities said they support students' right to peacefully protest and do not tolerate harassment or intimidation. They urge students to report any untoward behaviour towards staff. Almost rounding this up now. Sheffield University said it is committed to ensuring everyone feels safe and welcome on our campus and in our city, adding that it is written to all students to remind them of their code of conduct and was working with the student union to address concerns. Study Group, which runs Sheffield University's International College, said they are investigating an incident involving a 25-year-old student at the protest last week. Aston University said the students were told that masks should be avoided to aid the security team in keeping all students safe. Liverpool University said their staff worked closely with the police to manage the protests on campus earlier this month, and it remained peaceful throughout. The Chinese Embassy and the Chinese Students and Scholars Association declined to comment. Let me just kind of link this into another case that I reported, that I spoke about. Peter Dutton, the Australian minister, warned about this, and Beijing's response was a tantrum. You always know when Beijing is rattled because they tend to get very angry, and they retorted to Peter Dutton that it was shocking and malicious claims, which basically shows they're lying. They know damn well what they're doing. I take this quite personally because over the last 10 years I've had close links to the Chinese diaspora in much of my social and working life. In my last job, I worked for my local university as a social assistant. I can say this freely now because I'm not bound to them at this point, so it's not any sort of conflict of interest by making this video. And I worked with a lot of Chinese students. Now, thankfully, I never saw any of the sort of incidents that were raised in that report, but I did see a few tense situations between Taiwanese students and mainland Chinese students, which thankfully never really escalated, but, you could get the sense that it was there. But I have absolutely no doubt about the claims being made in the report because I've seen this directly in demonstrations in Newcastle city centre. I've seen plenty of videos showing the sort of behaviour of Chinese students abroad. It's irrefutable. I am not saying that every single Chinese student is a nationalistic thug who behaves this way. They are not. I've had Chinese friends who are very reasonable and open-minded people, but it is absolutely irrefutable that the Chinese embassies in Britain, America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and probably in France, Germany, and our other Western European allies are using some very underhand tactics. I personally think that they see British universities in particular as a soft touch. I think they see in this, Brexit confusion, they're sort of thinking Britain's going to do everything it can to get foreign investment. And there's a lot of investment that comes with Chinese students. These tend to be well-off students. They pay a lot of money for the tuition, so it's a lot of money going into higher education. I decided to have a look on social media at the various Facebook groups to Hong Kong societies and universities, and just for balance to look at Chinese societies as well. Now I have to be honest, I didn't see anything in any of those groups, at least nothing major, that gave away any sense of tensions. So whether they're just self-censoring, whether they've been warned not to post anything online, I don't know. But there hasn't been anything, for example, in any of the Hong Kong societies that people have spoken about feeling threatened or anything. And I haven't seen anything on the Chinese groups either that is necessarily promoting the Communist Party. So that's good. But I've no doubt about the claims being made. And it's a damn disgrace. Of course it goes both ways. If Hong Kong students are doing it, it's equally wrong. But I think that this just ties in with what we've been seeing over the last 11 years at least. I mean, since the time of the Beijing Olympics, it's very obvious that the Chinese regime uses its students as pawns, right? They always stoke up nationalistic sentiments. I mean, you just have to look at, and not just with Chinese students, with the Chinese diaspora in general. When Hu Jintao visited London's Chinatown, you know, he was met by flag-waving Chinese nationals. And you might say, oh, well, what's wrong with that? He's just the head of state and he's visiting the country. But, you know, what is really happening here is China is using undermining tactics. They're stoking up Chinese students and then they'll use our principles of free speech against us. So they'll stoke them up to, you know, bully and harass Hong Kong students or anyone else critical of the Chinese government, including British students. And then if anyone, you know, if we make an issue of it, they'll say, oh, but what about free speech? The West believes in free speech. And, you know, the irony here is after the Tiananmen Square crackdown, we actually extended the visa terms for Chinese students to protect them. Now we're finding that a new generation of Chinese students are acting as little pawns in the Chinese regime's game. I think a lot of them know full well. I don't necessarily believe they're all brainwashed communist drones. I think a lot of them know full well that there's a different political system and they, you know, they're coming from a country that is a single party regime that doesn't tolerate dissent. I think they know that. But it's a cultural thing as well. They want to save face. So they're very unlikely to admit it. Particularly in these sort of protest scenarios, it's much more important to save face and protect the honour of China. But, you know, these universities need to get some backbone and stop sitting on the fence. It's all very well making vague statements like, we don't tolerate harassment or bullying. Okay, so act on it. There's abundant evidence that these Hong Kong students are putting forward about their experiences. It's not good enough the university just giving kind of vague, you know, notifications like, oh, please behave yourself. They need to be threatening these Chinese students with expulsion and, if need be, kick them out of the country. If, for example, they commit assault or any other criminal act, they need to be deported. We need to make examples of some of them to send out a message to the others. I'm not talking about collective punishment. If they've done nothing wrong, then, you know, don't target them just because they're Chinese. That is not what I'm saying. What I am saying is this is not a fantasy. This is happening. And if we don't start to get control on it, then our university campuses are literally going to become a platform, possibly even for espionage. I really don't think that's an exaggeration, because the Chinese regime sees our universities as a soft touch, and with good cause. I mean, after all, they've set up Confucius Institutes, which are supposed to be cultural programs, but really they're just there to promote Chinese Communist Party mantra and Xi Jinping thought. We need to tell these Chinese students, look, you've paid a lot of money to be here, so by all means take the opportunities that your studies bring. Take in the social life, take in the cultural life, you know, and most of them do, to be fair. Most of them just get on with their own business. They don't engage in this sort of behaviour all the time. But when something flares up, like when there is a topical issue like Hong Kong going on, that's when you're liable to see this sort of behaviour. And I suspect it's also around the time of the national holiday. It's not a case of saying you're not allowed to have your opinion, you're not allowed to disagree with the Hong Kong protesters. Fine, disagree with them. What you cannot do is harass them, threaten them with death, with violence, pin them against the wall. Students doing that, male or female, whatever age they are, need to be threatened with expulsion. It's infuriating that this is happening, and I don't think these universities are really doing much. I mean, as Vincent Mack said at the University of Sheffield, I believe it was, their concerns, they don't feel their concerns are being taken seriously. So I think probably the university administrators are sitting on the fence. Sure, they'll make vague statements, oh, we don't tolerate abuse, but I think this is probably a case of valuing Chinese investment and not wanting to upset the Chinese government more than... because, you know, if they expel students, they know they'll get an angry phone call from the Chinese embassy, because the Chinese embassy is arrogant, you know, it never, you know, sort of self-introspects. A few years ago, the Chinese government did put out a kind of guideline about Chinese tourists behaving themselves in other countries, but that's about as much as they've ever done in terms of keeping some sort of control on the diaspora. In every other sense, what they have done, the control has actually rested very much in stoking them up and trying to get them to have their little nationalistic demonstrations on our streets. It goes without saying, no British national would get away with this in China. So I believe our tolerance is being used against us. And to anyone who says I'm xenophobic, I emphasise I am not talking about collective punishment. I'm not talking about tarring all Chinese students with the same brush. I'm just saying there is clear evidence that this is happening. And it's not good enough saying, oh, we're not going to tolerate it. Act on it. So, those students that pinned the girl against the wall, they need to be expelled. That's absolutely disgusting. They need to be expelled without question. Investigated, but at the I think they're not even bothering to fully investigate these things because they're thinking, oh well, we better not upset the Chinese. And this is yet another example of China's undermining tactics in this country. It's not the only one. The Kong Lin Lin incident is another example, but we just need to wake up. I think there are too many people in positions of power in this country who are not taking the China threat as seriously as they should. University administrators, some of these are well-established, prominent institutions that are allowing themselves to become hotbeds of communist intolerance. Really. And it is very troubling. So I completely back the Hong Kong students, and anyone who wants to criticise Beijing, they should have the freedom to do that. I'm not saying the Chinese students have to agree with them. I'm not saying they are not allowed to disagree. They can. What they cannot do is harass, bully, shout down and try to intimidate other students. They're in Britain now, not China, and they have to accept that there are a lot of people that do not like the Chinese government. They either accept that or they get the hell out. As far as I'm concerned. This is also about respecting our sovereignty. And what we're seeing here is actually an insult to our sovereignty. These students come here, I'm talking specifically about the hardliners, and they think they can behave this way, stoked up by the Chinese embassy. I mean, it's a damn disgrace what the Chinese embassy are doing, and we need to warn them. Let them have their tantrum. They can have their tantrum with Canberra, with London, with Washington, with Ottawa, with Auckland. Let them have their tantrum. They're going to do that anyway. But we need to let them know we know what they're doing and we're going to act on it. And if it continues, we need to make some sort of threat, like, okay, we're not going to take Chinese students anymore. We cannot put money before values. We cannot have a situation where money is more important than other students feeling intimidated. I mean, Hong Kong students saying that they're frightened to go to lectures because of the prominence of Chinese students there. And if you are a Chinese student, I've nothing personally against you if you're not the sort of person I'm talking about. But if you're engaging in nationalistic demos, if you're threatening Hong Kong students or other critics of the Chinese government, just be aware we have laws in this country. Okay? And those students may not have confidence from the university body, but they can go to the police. And I would encourage them to do so. And of course it works both ways. I would also say Hong Kong students, shouldn't bully Chinese students, although I haven't seen evidence of that. Unfortunately, in Hong Kong, there is a hardcore aspect of rioters now who are damaging the movement to some extent, and that's really unfortunate, and that's also wrong. Bullying and intimidation is wrong, period. But this is happening, it's happening in our midst, and these universities need to act on it. Stop sitting on the fence, it's pathetic. I mean, they say they are, warning students not to behave this way. Why have there been no expulsions? Given the amount of evidence that shows what's going on, why have no Chinese students been expelled? Why not? That's what I'd like to know.